on that note, it's my honor and pleasure to welcome Zuill and welcome you all to the third keynote of the day to kick off the afternoon's proceedings on mob programming. Woody is an agile and lean software development guide and coach. He has been programming for almost 40 years. And as we all know, he's the originator and pioneer of the mob programming approach to software development. So without much further ado, let's hear from Woody.
All right. Well, hello, everybody. Those of you who have not heard me give this talk before probably is a handful, because I've given some version of this talk probably over 1,000 times now. So those of you who have seen it before, I apologize for seeing all these same images and hearing the same lame jokes again and again, but that's life, and that's what we're going to do today. So we have this workshop, or I should say sort of this hands-on session starting a little bit after this is done, and they wanted to have sort of an introduction to mob programming. That's what this is going to be. This is sort of my standard introduction. I started out as a programmer somewhere around 1982, maybe 83. I don't remember exactly, although I'd worked in technology before that. But I had bought a couple computers that I needed because the industry I was in was starting to change towards using a lot of computers. And I thought I better learn about computers. And I bought a couple, two, and started using them. And I found that the computers were quite good, pretty rock solid things. One was a specific computer for doing certain kinds of work. The other was a general purpose computer. And but the software on these computers was not very good. And I started realizing that if I was going to get the software I wanted, I might need to learn to write it myself. So that's how I got started writing software. And to be really clear about that, I really thought, boy, if you can make a living writing such crummy software as this, I should be able to fit right in. And so I started learning to program. And really within a month or two, I was creating software. I did not know that there was any idea that you would sit with someone else writing software until about 15 or so years later, when I was paying a lot of attention to what was going on, and I saw people writing and talking about pair programming. And so as soon as I heard about that, I was already old enough. I guess I was 45 or 46, something like that. And I was old enough to know that if you hear a crazy idea, then you probably better investigate, because it's probably pretty good. And Albert Einstein is attributed often with having said, if at first an idea does not seem absurd, it's not a good idea. So I thought, okay, well, and I went along with that. And I started learning to pair program. It took me about 5 years to get enough experience with it, because it was hard to find somebody to pair program with, amongst other things, to have it turn into being my preferred way of working. So another 5 years into it, or 7 or 8 years into it, we stumbled upon this idea of mob programming. Mob programming is where more than one person is sitting at the computer or working in the same environment. And I want to make it really super clear, this does not replace solo programming or pair programming. It's simply an addition to the way we can think about working. Now, I don't think I invented mob programming. People ask me that. I think I'm one of the originators of it at the place that we were working at that time. And it was really a whole team effort. But I believe there were other people around the world trying to do similar things. They just weren't very vocal about it. And what they were sharing didn't line up exactly with what we were doing. We accidentally gave it the name mob programming, and there's a lot of people talking about calling it something else now. So if you have any good ideas about what to call it, I'm open to hearing that. I originally wanted to call it whole team programming, which those of you old timers here who were into extreme programming at that time, I'm sure had heard the term whole team programming or whole team in conjunction with doing software or agile software or extreme programming. So I just thought of this as being the natural, real result of working as a team, because I'd worked at a lot of places where they called themselves the database team or the, order team, the order system team, or maybe they'd call themselves the deployment team, although in those days, I'm not sure we called it exactly deployment. but nobody ever worked as a team. I remember my first really big, so my first contract working for others doing software was in, I think, late 98 and then solidly in 99. I worked with a team. My first real contract out of that was 3 months working with a team. And then I went to another contract and I thought, boy, this is so wonderful. I want to go to a big company. And I went to the largest available position. I was put on a group of 200 developers who were broken apart into teams, but nobody worked as a team. It'd be like if you went to play football or some sport with all your friends and you said, okay, you go over on that field, I'll go over on this field. You know, like everybody's playing something on different fields. We're not really a team. We're not interacting together in the same game at the same time. And this confused me because I'm easily confused, but it also confused me because why are we calling ourselves a team? I started investigating that, reading a lot about teams. I've studied a great deal about that since then. And mob programming is sort of the natural outgrowth of my journey of trying to figure out why are we calling ourselves teams and how can we be more team-like. So I always start with this slide, all my talks. I'm not here to tell you what to do. That would be silly. I'm here to share with you some thinking I've done and some ways of working that I've experienced. I'm not here to tell you, definitely I'm not here to tell you what you should do. Figure that out on your own. There's lots of other people to work with and talk with, and you will find what's right in your organization or for yourself. This originated at Hunter Industries. I always like to share this for two reasons. I want to honor them for having the opportunity to work with a team without too much interference, and I'll explain that later if we have the time. And but also notice their byline or their motto there: built on innovation. Back when I was interviewing with them, their byline was the irrigation innovators, because they make irrigation products, mostly for landscaping, but other things too. And I pointed out to the guy who was going to be in charge of hiring me, the director of the department. And I said, hey, look, it says right here, the irrigation innovators, if I'm not going to be allowed to innovate, we should stop this right now. I'm not going to stay here. If you hire me and you don't live up to that, I won't be here very long. And he agreed that we would be allowed to innovate. And I want to make it really clear about this. You cannot control innovation. You need to liberate innovation. That means every company that has like a leader or like a director of innovation that's a totally misunderstood concept. Why are we even thinking in those terms? But let's go on. Usually I ask this in the workshop, what do you want to learn today? We don't have time to deal with that today. So mob programming, simply put, is this. It's all the brilliant minds working together. That means collaborating on the same thing at the same time and in the same space. Those three things are just, to me, what Agile was about. When the Agile manifesto was written, I believe that all those people who were involved in that space at that time, which includes, in a lot of ways, almost everybody who was looking for making improvements over the old phased approach, even though they weren't there at this Snowbird meeting where they coined the term and that manifesto. Here's the thing. I think they understood that the reason a lot of stuff was not going well in software development because we weren't able to collaborate well. We were breaking things into phases where people were working at different times on often the same thing, but at different times, or they were not even working on the same thing. So that was, if you're on a team, like a database team, I would get a ticket and I go work on that ticket. And someone else gets a ticket for someone else. They go work on that. We're never interacting as a team, even though we're working in the same space. So they realized if we are not working on the same thing, we can't even collaborate. So we need to work on the same thing. If we do it at the same time, that really enables real collaboration. And if we work in the same space, they used to talk about being co-located. This really enhances our ability to collaborate. Nowadays, since everything is, work from home and we're all in different spaces, it works just as well to do mob programming on a distributed team. Matter of fact, I've been doing that going way back before this current pandemic situation with many teams because, we're in different parts of the world. There's some difficulties with it, particularly time zones, but It's not that big of a deal if you're at least in a close enough time zone to have time to be together. You can figure this all out. And there's many teams who have, and people are writing about it. And we'll see a little bit more about that later. But when we were co-located and all sitting at the same computer, this just emphasizes that we are working on the same thing at the same time and in the same space. When we're at the same computer, we are really limiting our work in progress to being one thing at a time. And if we can't do that, if we can't limit our work in progress or work in process, whatever terminology you want to use for WIP, WIP, if we're going to limit our WIP to one thing, we get a super benefit to that. I'll try to cover a little bit of that in a bit, but it allows us to work on something from start to finish directly. This is very much a lean concept of single piece flow. And this allows us to do it. We no longer have the context switching, the multitasking. We don't have the disruptions, the interruptions, all the things we get when we're separated to work apart from each other. So I'd like to think of it this way. We're going to gather together all the skills and knowledge we need, which is representing the people together. So we get a super brain. We're going to have 5 or 6 brains, maybe 10. We had it at one time as many as 14 working on the same thing in the same space at the same time on something something that was really important to the company to get done quickly. When we gather that together, we get this super brain. All the questions get answered by these people, and yet we're all different people with different skills. So this requires a very high level of skill integration, our ability to work as an individual, even though we're on a team, but we're contributing our own special skills. You can think of this, if you're thinking about it in a sport kind of a manner, is you will have all the skills you need on your team, and you're going to be playing whenever the game is playing with your specialties, but holistically, you're focused on that game. So that's the same basic idea. You can think about it with music. You know, when I was a kid and the band comes through town and you go to see the concert, they're all there together. Now in the studio, it might be different, but when they're in a concert, the whole band is there. And they've learned to lip sync really accurately to the music that they're pretending to perform. I'm just kidding. So anyways, you get the idea. When you perform music together, you bring all your different skills. It's not like 5 guitar players or 5 bass players. It's going to be a guitar player, a bass player, a drummer, a singer, maybe multi-skilled in all of these things. But there you go. Same basic idea. It kind of looks like this when we're co-located. Everybody's sitting at the same workstation. We have one computer through which all of our work goes. It's in the middle of the screen there. And representing this picture is a tester, a product owner, a developer who is actually also the manager of the team, another developer, a database developer and DBA, another developer and another developer. So all of our skills of development were needed for this. Plus, we want to have a tester there if possible. A product owner is a first-class, full-fledged member of the team, and whatever other skills we need, including the database person. Now, at that time, we didn't get the full-time attention from these other team members. I believe the way it's being done there now, and you could ask them, they usually have all the skills they need together on that one team at that one time. Let's move on. This is what it looks like from the back. And the main reason I like to show this is you can kind of see that we are spread out. We're not all crammed together. That other picture, we had a few extra team members, but we had room to just be comfortably distanced from each other. This is important. You don't want to be crammed. Have you ever done pair programming where you're both sitting in a little cubicle and you're both leaning over each other practically? That's not very comfortable. We want to find a way to make this comfortable. The easier we make it to do it, the more likely we are to get the value out of it. You have to get good at this. This isn't something that happens overnight. You don't just put 5 people together and say, you're now a mob programming team. You put those 5 people together if they're willing to work together, and that would always be voluntary in my opinion, should be. And they're going to need to practice working together. We can talk about that some other time, but you need to practice the skills needed. Most programmers, like I was, program a large chunk of their career solo. And now we expect them to have skills of actually talking to each other in a kind and considerate manner. Maybe we haven't built those skills yet. And some people are naturally good at that, and some of us aren't. I'm easily frustrated. I lose patience quickly. It's hard for me to focus if things aren't moving quickly. So it's going to change when you're working as a team. You have to learn the skills of dealing with this difference between when you're alone or when you're working with a team. Just as an example of how it can be if we're working with remotely. I happened to be in Belo Horizonte, and the rest of the team was in Newport Beach, California. And so, and this has not been infrequent for me. Over the last 5 years, I've been traveling a lot, and I'm working with teams most of the time as well, and I'll be doing it remotely. You just have to get the tools and get the protocols in place. It works. So I want to cover a couple things about the nature of it. And if we've got time, I'll tell you a little bit about the story of how this originated. We won't have time for much else, but I'll kind of go through these things best I can. It's not like 5 people watching one person coding. It is really 5 or 6 people at the computer. And we could say coding or programming, even if they're not a code writer. They could be a product owner. They could be a tester, a database person who doesn't write code, whatever. But we all take turns at the keyboard based on who wants to take the keyboard at that moment. We usually use the rotation. We might talk about that in a minute. It doesn't matter all that much. You find the way that works for your team. We used a mechanism called driver navigators, which I was first introduced to back in 1998. Someone explained to me it was like a rally car race. Mob programming is like a rally car race where you have somebody at the steering wheel, in this case at the keyboard, and somebody with the map who's guiding the person that's taking care of the details. So if you think of it as a rally car race, or just as me getting in the car with my wife, we're going to drive a few hundred miles to go to a wedding somewhere. So we get in the car together. That was in the days before all weddings were online, I guess. And so we're going to drive there. So I sit down, I'm the navigator. My wife takes the steering wheel, and I'm going to guide her. And I might just say, I could say something as simple as, let's get on the freeway going north through the desert. And I don't have to tell her too much more about that because she knows we prefer not to go through Los Angeles, which is really what we would go through if we were headed 200 miles north usually. But driving through LA is a mess. So you drive through the desert, there's no traffic, it's more enjoyable. You get to see some wilderness, you get to see some mountains, maybe some snow, whatever. So I can give her a very simple instruction. And if she knows how to accomplish it, she just does it. But if she doesn't, I could say, okay, we're going to head north through the desert. Is that all right? And she would say, yeah, that's great. And so we'll say, okay, let's get over to the freeway from our home, go down to the end of our street and make a left turn. And off we would go. And I would say, okay, in about a mile and a half, we're going to have another left turn. And that'll bring us over to the freeway. So I don't have to give her any more direction than that till we get close to where we're going to take the turn. And then I can give her more details. So you give just enough detail as we go, if the person at the keyboard doesn't know how to accomplish what we're doing right now. So in coding, it could be the product owners, the first navigator. And they would say something like, well, what we want is a page where somebody can select what region they're in and then see the options available in their region. Now we have the big picture. We call this the intent. That's what we're going to be working on. It's a story. That's, in Agile terms. We don't need to know much more than that. Matter of fact, we're going to work on that till it's done. And it's going to be done in 2 or 3 hours. We found that almost any story we took on turned into a 2 or 3 hours or sometimes half a day. We were deploying stuff to production as often as we could. This is when we originally started working this way. So this is the basic guideline that we would use. Is everybody's a navigator and they're allowed to guide the person at the keyboard at any time. We used a procedure or a process where the person at the keyboard did not contribute to the conversation or to the navigation. It doesn't necessarily need to be that way, but that's the guideline we followed. And we used this that came from Zuill and Falco. For an idea to go from someone's head into the computer, it must go through someone else's hands. Now, I learned that in 2009. I've been trying to figure out exactly when I learned that, but I've been using something like that. Prior to this, I had some sessions with Llewellyn where we were working on some open source code, and I was noticing how diligent he was about following this guideline. Now, I heard somebody earlier talking about working remotely and how driver navigator meant somebody was always getting bored or somebody wasn't engaged. I find it to be the exact opposite. So I'm puzzled. I'd love to hear the details of that. But what we found was if you're the driver and you have the idea, you leave the keyboard and the other person takes the keyboard, which is the opposite to how I normally saw pair programming working. So this I learned for pair programming, and it just naturally fit into the mob programming. So anybody can navigate at any time. That just requires that we have a team agreement, that we are careful about how we interrupt each other, that we don't change directions all the time, that we don't insist on doing things our own way, that we don't share too many ideas. If we have an idea that's in play, let's accomplish that. And we might put up on our, what we would call our parking lot. Pretty soon, when we're done with this part, I want to consider this other thing. We would be willing to try everybody's ideas. As a matter of fact, we made a point of, if somebody suggested an idea, we would use it. We would try it. We might not use it. So we're trying to get a shared understanding, not necessarily a shared agreement, but we can't get that shared understanding unless we completely understand what each other is suggesting. Now, discussions often lead us to think we're having an understanding, but I found that trying things really drives us to having that understanding, or at least to discover what we're not understanding. Okay, so I want to move on pretty quickly here. So I'm going to go into just showing you some pictures. I like to do this and see if I have enough time to tell you a little bit about the origination story. But this seems crazy. How could this possibly work? And those of you who had never heard of it before, who have never had a chance to try it, it certainly could seem crazy. But remember what I said earlier, a lot of people were saying about pair programming, that seems crazy. How could that be effective? But my attitude was the opposite. It's like, okay, if this person is saying this is working good for us, I want to give it a try. And to me, giving it a try doesn't mean for a half hour. It means for a year or two. Now, I learned that in my study of the lean movement. And I remember somebody had written about how at Toyota, which is a big name, in the lean movement, that when you were learning a skill or a job, let's say you were going to be a manager, you did things as was their standard, and you did it for 3 years. And then you were considered able to make up your own path. So I don't know if I understood that correctly, but I really liked that. And so I was adopting that for a lot of my things. If I thought something was worth trying, another good example would be test-driven development. Now, I've been doing what we used to call test harnesses for a long time. But when I heard of test-driven development, I said, well, I want to see how that works and give it a try. So I tried it for about 2 years, and it became my preferred way to work. Matter of fact, when I was prohibited to work that way at a particular company, I just didn't check in the test code. I still had it because I prefer to keep from stabbing myself or shooting myself in the foot over and over again. I prefer to keep from making mistakes for myself. I like to have a system that keeps me from doing that. So you get the idea here. If pair programming is good, let's give it a try. It seems preposterous. That means it's worth trying. So it's being done all over the world. This is the original place. Now these pictures are all co-located till we get near the end. Let me quickly go through them. I want you to mostly pay attention to two things. One is all the different ways people have set up. And you got to know they're all using different practices, different ways of working, and also to how engaged people seem to be. I took a lot of these pictures, but I also just gleaned them off the internet. I'm going to quickly go through them. This is a team learning to mob program, so their environment isn't really nicely set up. But look at those three elements: a large screen, a central location to get to the keyboard, and a whiteboard. What could be simpler? Here's a group with a very similar setup, but a nice with the table in front of them. It makes it a little more comfortable. This is a group at GDS in London, Government Digital Services. When I visited them maybe 5 or 6 times, I never did a workshop or anything for them, but they had a number of teams doing mob programming. And I love this picture to see how engaged these people are. I've never seen it where people are not engaged in the work if it's necessary for them to contribute. If we have a lot of redundant skills here, then we might start finding ourselves not learning anything, not contributing. Both of those are ways of helping with a team. And if that starts happening, we might want to consider we should go to a different team. But yeah, you're working on something. It's going fast. In a few minutes, you're going to need to contribute something. Someone else is thinking the same thing about their thing. We're hearing the ideas going around and we're growing them. It's engaging. I think Zipcar in Boston, same thing. This is TUI in Stockholm. When I visited them, I didn't do a workshop for them back in those times, but they had 8 teams working this way. I think they now have more. I'm not sure what they're up to. I haven't talked to them over the last year. Unruly in London, when I visited them, had 6 teams. I love their setup here, really nice. I like to show this picture because this is a picture at Harvard, which is a university of great respect, I guess. And so it makes me just seem better because I've put a picture of Harvard doing the thing that I've talked about. So that's just there for me to name drop Harvard. So you notice I'll just say Harvard over and over again. Let's go on. They're using Agile. They're using mob programming in this Agile course that I think Richard Kasparowski is teaching. This is a team that is a software support team. They support the users, which are programmers who might call in and buy their product and need some help. They do it as a team. These are, I think, could be wrong. I think they're all developers who work on other teams as well, and they switch off. But I could have that wrong. Here's a picture of one of their teams programming. Great setup. Here's a team in South Africa. Also a beautiful setup. You notice they got the team agreement there. All their work is there. Their Kanban board, their things like their parking lot. Everything's right there. 3 keyboards on the table. Real easy to wheel your chair up and you're at the keyboard. I warned these people. They need bigger monitors. They should have got some big monitors. I don't know what they're thinking. Hopefully you all know that's Grace Hopper, long before they even had monitors on computers. I don't even know what mechanism they use, but it looks like fan fold paper was their output. So does any of you here remember dot matrix printers? Yeah.
Oh.
What a time that was. Okay, here's a group that was just starting out, and I like to point this out. The Scrum Master for this team, I think it was this team, he brought his monitor from home because they couldn't get allocated a large monitor. He brought his large monitor from home, put it in front of the team, and let them learn to do mob programming. That's a good example of what I would consider is the spirit of Scrum. By the way, I was a certified Scrum Master. I no longer am because I don't have much need for it anymore. But I'm not necessarily a proponent or an advocate of Scrum. It's just, it helps you think about some things. Hopefully, you really pay attention to the inspect and adapt concept. Let's go on a little bit more. This is a user group, and this is a user group. This is the software, used to call themselves Software Craftsmanship Group in Paris, France, that originated a lot of the ideas about coding dojos. And it was their models that I followed that led to us eventually doing mob programming. So we're almost out of time for my talk. I'm going to show you a couple more things. Notice the posture of this fellow across the table. This is an important thing to consider. If your posture requires that you turn your head or twist your back to watch a screen all day, you're not going to want to do this very long. That will fatigue you. If you find yourself getting fatigued working this way, either together or remotely, you really should have some retrospectives and discussions about it. I believe it shouldn't be fatiguing. I think it should be extremely engaging and yet calm. And it should allow you to get to the end of the day feeling just as refreshed when you started the day. So I think mob programming can be a very relaxing thing because you're sharing the cognitive load. If you're not finding it relaxing, we probably need to learn some more skills about interacting with each other. A couple more pictures. I didn't take this picture or the next one, but these are in Japan. I did visit Japan, and I saw this experience. People with their table at floor height, and they're working at a table, sitting on the ground, and they also have desks. So these are some. I think this was at a conference, and this is some of the actual work area. That would be a difficult work environment to work in, but I do want to point out whatever you've got is a good place to start. And then start reflecting on it quickly. How can we make this better? That's a good thing to do. One last co-located team. This is public television in Stockholm. They had at least 7 or 8 teams working this way. And I believe the person who wrote this article is up in the corner here. That's Leah Kovac-Beckman. She's been a keynote speaker, a speaker at our mob programming conference in Boston. I love these pictures. It shows a very active team. She happens to be a UX designer working full-time with a team. Some UX people tell me, well, I can't work with the developers. I got to be doing other things. but I believe it's a good thing to do this, get all the skills together. Note the whiteboards, lots of whiteboards, and mechanisms they have for communicating. It's really powerful. I want to show a few things of people working remotely, and then probably it's time for us to take questions. This is a group called Corgibites that have been doing this, I think, 4 or maybe even 5 years, working remotely, doing mob programming. This is another group that you've probably have heard of, but they've written some articles or blog posts, and there's a link to one there. Zapier, I'm not sure how to say it. It's a good word either way. And they've been doing this. Also, Cucumber.io. If you're aware of what Cucumber is, this was the team that was managing it. It's an open source project for doing behavior-driven development tool. Anyways, these people are all sort of famous speakers in their own rights, and they've been doing mob programming a long time. I've visited them, and I've worked doing mob programming with them. Great bunch of folks. Lastly, this is a combination of both remote and co-located work. This is not programming, but they're working on something very similar to doing a project. They have this holistic focus or this focus on the overall mission, but everybody has the skills needed because no one person has all the skills needed. Some people are working remotely because they're in a space shuttle. I guess when this picture was taken, they don't use those anymore, I don't think. Boy, I wonder if you could buy one and just put it on a property and live in it. That'd be kind of cool. But this is the same idea. All the brilliant minds brought together at the same time on the same thing, and they can work through it directly. This mission would fail if they didn't do this. That knowledge is necessary. No matter what your skill is, if it's part of this, you've got to be there. Well, let's call that a day. I think that I'm ready to answer questions. Normally I go on to talk about why would we work this way and all the benefits that we saw from it. And I want to close it off with this next little bit. We have all these benefits: knowledge sharing, continuous code design review, so on and so on. And those were the things we noticed. We were getting more done. It was of higher quality. We were all learning a lot, and it was fun, engaging, less stressful. That's what we noticed the very first day we did this. But I like to answer this from a different point of view for you managers out there. Why would we work this way? Because the team decided to work this way. This is a decision for the team to make, not for someone to tell them they're mob programming or someone to say, we don't allow you to mob program. We need to liberate the teams, the developers, to figure out how they can best work. They might need some help in learning to do that because they're not used to doing that because they've been, well, I'll take that back. We don't acknowledge that people are self-organizing. In a company, they'll say, oh, our teams are self-organizing, and maybe they are. But even in an organization where management is managing everything, the people are still organizing. Otherwise, they self-organizing. Otherwise, they couldn't put up with working in your terrible environment. So if you're managing people by telling them what to do, who they work with, what they'll work on, where they'll sit, what time they have to be there, what meeting they have to go to, what documents they have to fill out, stop it, to quote Bob Newhart. Stop it. Alrighty, I think we've got enough. Are there any questions I should cover?
There are quite a few questions on the chat. I can read that out to you, Woody.
If that's the best way to do it, I'm going to remove the screen share, if this works okay for everyone. And I will do my best to answer questions. Remember, with me, if you ask one question, you will get 3 answers. And I will ramble on and on. So keep me focused here.
Yep. First question from Travis. You mentioned that you need to work at being a successful mob programming team.
Yeah.
How have you seen a mob programming team iterate successfully? Retros, any tips?
Okay, so the big thing about my approach was, before we were mob programming, was that we will do daily retrospectives, looking for what went well today and how can we get more of that tomorrow. This is a very simple concept. I think I learned this back in the 80s, or probably I would say maybe when I was 10 or 12 years old, but really started implementing it in my own organization. I had a little company back in the 80s and 90s as I was trying to figure out how to better manage things. So doing retrospectives in 3 or 4 different ways. One is doing it just in time. Whenever something noteworthy happens, let's just stop the presses, so to speak, talk about what happened. It often could be a very positive thing, or sometimes it can be what we might consider a problem. But if we stop and do a retrospective, that could be useful. But maybe we could do it hourly. Some teams I know do that. Maybe do it at the end of every session, 2 hours or 3 hours. I was a real fan of doing them daily, but all these other ways as well. So at the end of each day, we would ask ourselves what went well and how can we get more of that? But that doesn't mean we shouldn't also be doing them every few weeks and maybe even every 2 weeks or once a month for other kinds of things. But a team who needs to learn to work well together should be focused at first in doing exercises and studying how can we become better listeners? How can we become better at collaborating with each other? And some of the things I mentioned earlier, like let's try every idea, that includes people. It brings people in to share their ideas. But if somebody shares their idea and we're not willing to try it, and they do that a few times, they may feel it's not safe for them. Somebody's going to argue with me about why we should try my idea. When we work solo, we try all kinds of wacky ideas, right? We don't just say, okay, I'm going to just completely think this thing through before I write a line of code. Have you ever watched somebody writing code? They're going to go, they write a line and then they go, oh, wait, that's not going to work. And they delete it and they start something. They go, I better look at Google, and so on. I'm going to send an email to my friend. We're changing all the time. We have to make it easy as a group. Now, I think I've given you the 3 answers. Let's go on to something else.
Next one. In today's Agile world, where there are often time constraints and pressure to release as fast as possible, have you found that mob programming enables the team to be more productive, or does it get in the way? Does it make getting to production longer?
Getting things to production is probably a very bad way to approach our work. Making it easy for us to get things to production, that might be a good way to focus on our work. So mob programming, we found, allows us to get a great deal more done. And it's not so much about working faster. Matter of fact, we often felt we were going really slow, but we were getting a lot more done. Why is that happening? It's because we shortened the path of going from starting up something to getting it delivered. And if we get good at breaking things into small pieces, if we get good at not doing all the things we thought we needed to do, if we get good at trying ideas that will lead to a better result. Matter of fact, all you Agilists out there, if what you think is we are doing Agile because we need to get things done fast, you probably want to do a retrospective on that. Agile and extreme programming, we're both about making our work more human or humane. I'm not sure which is a better word to use there. That's what this is about. So if we're talking about being in a modern software development world and we think we can manage things to be faster, we have a misplaced focus. We should be focused on making things easier, not faster. This is a big difference. And most managers, please, you managers here, I'm going to insult. If I'm not insulting managers, I probably am not doing my job, right? So management has to change. Management has to stop being what most companies think managers are. This is not helping. This is why Agile exists in the first place, because management didn't work at getting this sort of stuff done. We have to understand the domain we're in. This is not the domain of ditch digging or the domain of retail sales operation and things like that. So we just have to understand, if you have a business where your model is very simplified and made so that like an 18-year-old can manage a bunch of 17-year-olds to shove burgers out the door or out the window or to the DoorDash people or whatever it is, yeah, you can simplify all your processes. But as we get into knowledge work, we have to, well, I'm back to saying the word liberate. We have to liberate our brains. This is not about working quickly from one thing to another. It's about discovering better approaches. And it's really a discovery process. So I hope that helped a little bit. I hate to say it. Every talk I give, mob programming is a highly effective way of working. That we question that it is a puzzlement to me. And maybe I'll say it this way. Do you think you can get things done faster when you separate the people that should be working together? Is that the attitude we have? I would question that. Matter of fact, people often ask me this: is there any research that proves that working as a team is better than working alone? Because I don't want to try it unless that research exists. And yet I will reverse that question. Can you show me the research that proves that working alone is better than working as a team? And yet that's the way you're already working. Did you go and find that research to prove to you that you should have your people working alone? I think it's mixed up that we think we need proof to change from the thing that obviously isn't working, but we got blinders on. We're not willing to admit that this way of working is not good, where we separate everybody and make them sit alone. Now, sometimes we need to sit alone to think and to pay attention to something that we would be distracted from our train of thought. So mob programming isn't a replacement for that time. You can work alone, and you can work as a pair or 3 or 5. These all have different times and different places. So a team that, let's say, has 5 or 6 people, and you gather in the morning, you start working on something. Somebody might say, I want to go do some research on this, and I feel I'll be better off doing that alone. They have the right to go do that. They don't even need to explain it. On our team at Hunter, we allowed anybody to leave at any time to do whatever they wanted. Maybe they need a walk. Oh, I shouldn't have mentioned the word Hunter. I'm not sure that it's okay to mention Hunter in front of people who work at Hunter. So I'm not going to mention Hunter anymore. Here's the thing. This doesn't take away your ability to work alone. It enhances your options. There is such a thing as being in the zone, or having this what they call flow, personal, private, psychological flow. That's a real thing, and I'm sure you've all experienced it. But there's also a concept of team psychological flow. It's a different, related, but different type of flow. So there you go. I would say if we're questioning the effectiveness of mob programming, we probably should be experimenting with it and getting good at it. Let's do that. So do we have any time for more questions?
Yeah, I think we have a couple of more minutes. I'll go on to the next one. When doing driver navigator, what if there isn't clear navigation? Like, what do you think works better for difficult problems that requires further research? Is that a time to take a break, or maybe stop?
If there's no clear path forward. Now, remember, you got the whole team there. So if we can't figure out as a team what our next step should be, it might be time to set it aside and sleep on it. You know, have you ever heard that term? Everybody probably has. Let's sleep on it. What that really means is let our subconscious mind sort it out. And then tomorrow morning, maybe we'll get a clear indication of what we should do. When I was quite a bit younger, I did a lot of design for advertising and signage and things like that. And we would get a complex problem to solve, like a large wayfinding situation, or maybe a sporting event that we needed to create signage for, and we needed to do some designs, and we just weren't getting it. We'd work all day long. My wife and I, we often worked together, and in our small company, we had 8 or 10 employees. We wouldn't get to the solution we wanted to get to. And then at the end of the day, we go, oh man, this has really been, we're not getting anywhere. Well, we come in the next morning, we would notice, oh, I know what to do now. And all of a sudden we're doing it. Now, my wife noticed this first. And one day she said, I notice every time we work really hard on something and we don't get a solution, the next morning we got some good ideas to use. So let's do an experiment. Let's look at the project, get all the info we can, let it settle in what the problem is a little bit, and set it aside and do something else for the rest of the day. And tomorrow morning we'll come in and see what happens. It turned out that actually worked really well. So when our best ideas come to us, isn't necessarily something that we can force. It doesn't happen. We can't force it when we put 5 people together any more than we can force it when we're working alone. Some people need to go take a walk or go watch a movie, or nowadays read Twitter for the next 3.5 hours. Whatever it is that you do it and disengage your mind from the thing you're working on. That is not necessarily a bad idea. So yeah, sometimes you don't have the idea, but there are lots of little things you can try to spark the ideas. Because we could just say, hey, let's brainstorm. The old traditional idea of brainstorming is throw out ideas no matter how ridiculous they are. Just see if something sparks in someone else's brain. Joshua Karievsky talks about mob programming as being the continuous integration of ideas. I love that. So if I share an idea, that might spark something in your brain, even if you didn't understand what I said, which you probably won't, because I'm not very good at explaining myself. Someone else hears what I said, they riff on it. What they feed back to me, someone else picks up on. And pretty soon, so communicating ideas out loud, trying things is a real good thing to do. But rarely in software development do we come up with the best idea right off the bat. But working with a team can help with that.
With that,
so, yes.
Yeah, there are several more questions. I think we are just past our time for the session. I think we can engage on the Hua platform. If you go to the Q&A session, you can interact with people.
I'm going to be going on to the mob programming, what's being called the mob programming workshop in just a few minutes. So that's probably where I'll be. I will be kind of facilitating a team, which pretty much means you should find somebody better than me to have, if you're going to go join that. But you're welcome to join my team. It makes me feel less lonely, and it makes me feel like my life was path has been well chosen, but that doesn't help you. So yeah, such is life. I do see a lot of familiar faces here, and maybe some of the names that didn't show yourselves, maybe I've met you before, but it's really a joy to me. I see Jeff Langer here and Chris Lucian. Jeff has helped me with a lot of test-driven stuff. He's a super expert on this. If you ever need a workshop in your company on test-driven stuff, he's excellent for that. I see, of course, Dave Larrabee here. I got an opportunity to work with him for at least 6 weeks, probably quite a bit more. And I am flabbergasted with how somebody can know so much stuff. And it was really a joy for me working with him. I see others here. Chris Lucian's there. I met him when he was just a child. And now look at him. He's like an old, responsible adult. Quite interesting. Yeah, when I met him, he was only 25 years old. He looked like a little baby, but now he looks like a normal grown-up. Dave Nicolette here. I think we first met face-to-face at a conference somewhere, but it's been a joy seeing you in these different things. It's wonderful to see so many people. So John, I think we've done some things together as well. Maybe some online mob programming sessions or something. I could be wrong, but I've seen you around before. So there we go. And if I've forgotten you, please forgive me. My memory isn't what it should be. And you're probably more memorable than my brain has the ability to control. So there's life.
Thank you.
Are we done here? You can stop the recording because I'm just embarrassing people now. So shut it.
For that.
So it is now shut off.